Homeowners insurance is the household expense we love to hate, but now insurance companies are increasingly hating on the upper Midwest. Minnesota is considered a high-risk state because of hail damage. Last August, a hailstorm here caused $1 billion in destruction. There are some predictions that insurers could start canceling coverage here. Sound far-fetched? Well, it's already happening in Iowa.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. Because of hail damage, Minnesota insurers have lost money 6 out of the last 7 years. Tonight you will hear from the insurance industry that says climate change is responsible. You'll also hear from a Cedar Rapids, Iowa homeowner whose insurance was abruptly canceled and his warning to Minnesota homeowners. You will hear from an independent insurance expert as well as a spokesperson for the insurance industry. We'll talk with Minnesota's Commerce Commissioner how Minnesota, along with high-risk states like Florida, have created state-backed high-risk insurance products that are insurers of last resort. They are very expensive and ultimately backed by taxpayers. We'll have analysis from WCCO's Director of Meteorology, Mike Augustyniak. But first, let's hear from Dave Langston of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Well, joining us right now is Dave Langston of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. His homeowner's insurance policy was canceled out of the blue. Dave, what happened to you?
We got a notification in January of this year that Pekin Insurance, who was our insurer, was going to withdraw from the Iowa market, and that the insurance policy that we had, which covered us through April 30th this year, would not be renewed, such that on May 1st we would need to have found new insurance by that time.
And so what happened? I assume you went looking for new insurance and you got kind of a rude awakening, didn't you?
Absolutely. And I've been telling people about this, and a lot of people are just agog that such a thing would happen. But we went shopping immediately in January with other agents. Eventually, I ended up having 4 different agents on the look for insurance for us. And initially, the findings I was hearing, I would dial back these agents every 2 weeks or so and say, "What's up? What do you know?" And what they were being told was that as they were presenting our coverage policy to underwriters, the underwriters were telling them, "Well, we declined to bid on that." So we were getting decline, just, we're not going to. And then we got to hear someone took it further and said, "Well, you don't have a prohibition against charcoal charcoal grills, not the gas grills, but charcoal grills on your decks, and that's why we're going to turn you down." And so it began to feel like they were kind of grasping at straws for reasons to say, "Here's why we're not going to insure you." And in fact, it became more clear and more clear that they were declining us because Iowa has trouble with wind and hail damage.
All right, which is very similar to Minnesota. What would you say, what would your advice be to Minnesotans? I mean, do you think this could happen to Minnesota?
Absolutely, everybody. There's even a woman in our condominium complex whose interior policy, the policy that covers the inside. We're in a condominium complex, so I was, as the president of the association, shopping for insurance for the roof and exterior of the buildings. Everybody also owns a policy that covers their interior walls and belongings. And during this process, one of my neighbors came up and said that she'd been canceled even on her interior insurance policy and had no claims against them, but just that they were just withdrawing their coverage. And so people have had to go out looking for that. And I think that everybody needs to be aware that the Midwest is coming under scrutiny as a potentially poor investment for insurance companies. That's really kind of the way it's being framed up, is that they're losing more money here than they're making. And so some people are withdrawing, other business entities are just raising their prices and adding a special deductible for wind and hail. So where I have $1 billion.
Let me ask you, you did eventually find, though, a policy. Was it a lot more expensive than the one that you'd had maybe 5 years ago?
Yes, with 4 people shopping, we had finally found coverage by April 29th, 2 days before we would be completely without insurance. And so, yes, we did find a policy. Our prior year policy for 5 buildings covering 17 units was about $18,500, and now it's up at $26,500 just to go from one year to the next. And in
Wow.
addition,
And let me ask you, had you had a lot of like filings, or had you been hit by hail before?
we had a hail and derecho claim in the prior 5 years.
Okay.
So we
All
had
right.
two claims in the prior 5 years.
Okay. Well, Dave, listen, thank you so much for sharing your story. And that is quite an increase. That's a big increase,
Yeah.
obviously. Thank you so much. Coming up, we'll hear from an independent insurance industry expert from the U of M, as well as a spokesperson for the insurance industry. Joining us right now, Professor Andrew Whitman from the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure. I'm glad to do it.
All right, let me ask you, the insurance companies are telling us that they are losing money in Minnesota so much that they may eventually have to pull out. Is that a legitimate claim?
Well, you have to look at what happens in catastrophes when insurance companies have to use all of their reserves. That they have the option to selectively underwrite. It's competitive, and you can't apply the blanket statement to all types of insurance. The main types that are having things increase are property and homeowners insurance. In the commercial market, is pretty good, and insurance companies can reduce their risk in the commercial market.
Got it. Well, let me ask you about homeowners. Are insurance companies losing money on homeowners insurance in Minnesota in the past few years?
Yes, they are, and in Minnesota, it's because of hail.
Really? And it's gotten bad over the past few years, isn't that right?
That's true, and the hail damage for auto as well as for property homeowners. Yes.
Okay. Does the insurance company, are we paying more in Minnesota right now because of that hail damage, or are we paying more because of all the problems all over the country, plus the hail damage in our state?
The answer is the latter. Yes, it's both. And the major causes vary by state: forest fire, flood, and there are some things that are going on that will minimize it, but it's going to continue as long as we have those fluctuations in weather and forest fires and floods.
Okay, so what's going on in other states, the disasters in other states, does impact our rates.
Well, it does, because insurance companies can spread their risk in a global market. It's called reinsurance. And when all the insurance companies that buy reinsurance to spread it, the reinsurance companies are getting hit in fact, all over the world, as well as for each state.
Is what's happening right now really shocking and altering the entire industry? Do you remember a comparable shakeup like this maybe 20 or 40 years ago? You've obviously been studying this for a long time.
Well, the biggest shakeup was 9/11, when the insurance industry paid out something like $35 billion, but it's not even close to that. And in the commercial markets, the business markets, it's okay. They're taking care of it. They have professional risk managers in the companies. And at the consumer level, for property, they better be working with an agent who has choices of different companies. And the best regulation in these markets is competition. And we have hundreds of companies in that marketplace.
Okay, well, listen, Professor Whitman, thank you so much. We really appreciate your insights.
Well, you're welcome.
Joining us right now is Aaron Cockney. He's the president of the Insurance Federation of Minnesota. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Esme.
Let me ask you, we are hearing about insurance companies pulling out of the state of Iowa. Is that going to happen in Minnesota?
We certainly hope not. One of the things that we've been working towards is to make sure that we have an industry and a market that continues to be available to people, and working to make sure that our regulatory environment and the things that we see in this state allow carriers to continue to write here for the benefit of everybody here in Minnesota.
But aren't some carriers scaling back on what they're offering in terms of homeowners policies in Minnesota?
Yeah, I think companies are evaluating what their risk appetite is based on, the losses that they've sustained over the last, 5 years. The recent New York Times article said that Minnesota homeowners insurers were the only state where homeowners insurers have lost money the last 5 years. And so companies are looking to evaluate, what can we do to make sure that we continue to remain solvent to be able to pay claims that our policyholders expect. And so evaluating, what coverages look like is a part of that. To be able to try to not raise premiums more than they have to. If you can't get it on the premium side, we start looking at claims and figuring, what can we do to help reduce some of these claims costs to be able to keep insurance available and affordable for Minnesotans.
How much are the homeowners increases that Minnesota homeowners have seen due to what's happened in Minnesota, namely, I would say hailstorms, and versus how much is happening in places like Florida and Louisiana?
Yeah, hail is significant in Minnesota. I mean, we've seen that, the effects of climate change are really having their most direct and financial impact to people as it relates to insurance. The coastal states, obviously, you mentioned Florida, but other states like Alabama, Mississippi have got hurricanes that they deal with. Minnesota doesn't have that, but what we do have is severe convective storms, largely brought on as a result of climate change. Hail and wind, produce these severe convective storms, which do significant amounts of damage. I think people can recall back to the 2017 hailstorms that hit the North Metro, Anoka, Coon Rapids. Hailstorm came through, lasted 20, 30 minutes. When all was said and done, that storm, the damage from that storm totaled $3.2 billion. It was the 10th most expensive storm in the world that year. Last year, we saw another $1 billion plus storm when the hailstorm that hit the West Metro. That's exactly right. So unfortunately, this is becoming a common occurrence of what we're seeing in Minnesota, and we're having to try to deal with that. And unfortunately, we're paying the price as a result of our severe weather.
I found a quote here that said from the former insurance commissioner of the state of California. He says, quote, "We are marching towards an uninsurable future." Is that true?
I hope not. As I said from the outset, I mean, I think the question becomes, at what point does, the price of insurance become unsustainable for people to be able to continue? And I think that there are a number of things that insurers are trying to do to make sure that we don't reach that point. And I think that's one of the things that as people get the shock of seeing their, insurance renewal as it comes in the mail and things, oh my gosh, this is so much more than I've seen. It's gone up the last 5 years. It's gone up the last 10 years. Part of that is to remain competitive and to make sure that insurance does continue to exist. I don't want to look out, 5 or 10 years.
That's part of the conversation now, isn't it?
100%. And that's part of the challenge, right? I mean, so, I've kind of said to people, if we could just push pause on our severe weather for a year, I think that would make a significant impact. Unfortunately, I mean, the history suggests that that's not going to be the case.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your insights.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity, Esme.
Coming up, the State Commissioner of Commerce and meteorologist Mike Augustyniak about what we can expect in the future, both for insurance coverage and the weather. Well, joining us right now is Commissioner Arnold, the Commissioner of Commerce for the state of Minnesota. Commissioner, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Insurers are telling us that Minnesota is really a high-risk state, and that in the future it's possible that insurance companies may actually pull out of the Minnesota market. What do you have to say about that?
Sure. So, I think that it's probably a little bit too early to make any judgments about what the market will look like. We have seen a lot of higher increases in premiums, as I'm sure most of your viewers have found when they open up their renewal envelope. I had quite the shock myself. Um, there are a number of factors that are impacting rates and kind of the general availability. Climate change is one. Certainly, we're seeing a lot higher volume of these really big storms like derechos that we see. So we regularly see billion-dollar storms here in Minnesota. There are also more temporary factors like inflation and sort of supply chain difficulties that make it really difficult. You're out of your house for longer because you can't get the supplies. So then your insurance company may have to pay hotel for longer. Those kinds of things add up over time. So I think it's fair to say that there are some temporary things that have put a lot of pressure on insurance premiums. And then there are some longer term challenges as we face a changing climate.
One of the things that Minnesota is doing is what a lot of other states are doing, is creating basically a high-risk pool that people can buy into. Tell us about that, because I'm not sure a lot of people are aware that Minnesota is doing this, as well as states like Florida and Texas.
Sure. So we've had this plan in place for quite a long time. The original purpose was to insure properties that maybe you live on an island, right? That is a very difficult property to insure, or you don't have easy access to fire whether it's fire hydrants or a fire unit. Those are the kinds of properties that it was sort of originally designed to insure, and still does insure. We haven't seen the large influx into sort of the public and residual markets that some other states have seen. It's certainly something we're watching for, and if we did start to see that, then we would want to have some conversations and understand what that meant for the market.
Okay, but it sounds like you're ready for that you've made that preparation to have that.
Yeah, we've had our FAIR plan in place for quite some time. Some states didn't have that. So if you think about Colorado, they've recently established one of these plans. Florida has made a number of changes to their plans given the big hurricane damage they've had over time. We have sort of the infrastructure in place. And so if we would need to use it, then certainly something we could think about. I think there are other tools that we would have in our toolbox as well.
Okay. And what are some of those other tools?
Sure. So I think there are a few things that we have been talking about and learning from other states. 2 years ago, or out of not this past session, but the 2023 session, we passed a program called Strengthen Minnesota Homes. The idea there is to require insurers to provide discounts when you have a more resilient structure. So like if your roof is less likely to have damage or you're less likely to have water intrusion, you should get a discount on your homeowner's insurance for that. And then we paired that with something that we hope will be funded in the future, which is we're setting up the infrastructure now to have a grant program so that if you can't afford to make some of those upgrades, or your insurance company doesn't offer it as part of a replacement, when you do get, if you get a new roof after a claim, then you would have an availability of grant money to make some of those improvements to your structure. The other thing we're thinking about is the governor has established a climate subcabinet, and we get to have some really interesting conversations across jurisdictions. So if you think about, water retention and control, which is kind of a county thing, but also pollution control agency and the Department of Agriculture think about that a lot. Those how the water moves through our ecosystem and our land also impacts your homeowner's insurance, because it can impact how likely your home is to flood. So we've started a lot of conversations to understand the sort of 360 view of what policy choices we may make in a totally different area that can have personal impacts for people in different ways that we might not have thought about before. But because we're seeing a changing climate, we need to be prepared for.
And I think that's exactly what the governor had intended with that. And it's interesting to hear you say the impact it's had. Commissioner, thank you so much. We really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Well, Mike Augustyniak is kind enough to give us his expertise, as he has on so many occasions. Mike, the insurance companies are saying they are pulling out of the upper Midwest and may soon pull out of places in Minnesota because they see more of these large hail events and large wind events that cost as much as $1 billion as of last August.
Yeah.
What do you see?
Well, so we see for inflation-adjusted totals that the number of billion-dollar weather-related disasters in the U.S. is growing exponentially and growing quickly. So we know that the claims are there, the losses are there. But at this point, and we want to be honest about all of these things that surround climate change, there is not a signal in the data that shows that the rate of tornadoes is going up or the number of severe thunderstorms, hail and wind-producing storms is going up. It
feels that way.
It does feel that way, and while that's an ongoing area of research, and we will have better data coming up, it could be that we're just in a really unlucky stretch, but I don't think that's the case. I think there is a climate change component to this, and I'll explain why. So in order to get damage, we need strong thunderstorms. Right. And one of the things that fuels strong thunderstorms is how much moisture is in the air, how much instability is in the air. We know from 8th grade science that the more you warm an air mass, the more moisture it can hold. So we are increasing the amount of moisture that's in the air. But the question of, well, how does some of the other factors that form severe weather, how are they changing? That's the piece that we're not sure yet.
All right. In terms of the forecast or looking ahead to severe wind damage, tornado damage, hail damage, what can you say for like this season or any season, or is it, as you just said, really unpredictable? Yeah,
so severe weather happens with a very specific set of ingredients that if you turn one of the knobs just slightly one way or the other, you can get a totally different outcome. So it's hard to do long-range severe weather forecasting. We do know that this summer nationwide is expected to be one of the hottest on record, and again, heat and instability does fuel these thunderstorms. But things that we don't know about that are also important, things like wind shear and cloud coverage, those are the things that we kind of have to look at day to day or a few days in advance. I would say, though, that overall, this has been a pretty quiet start to our season here in Minnesota.
You know, it's interesting, as I doing interviews for this story, I was struck by the fact that it wasn't that long ago that there were corporations and businesses who were very skeptical of climate change. The insurance industry is saying flat out, this is climate change, it's getting worse, and we all better be aware of it, which is a message that you meteorologists have been sounding for a long time.
I mean, we've been saying it for decades, and I'm glad that people are starting to listen. Time will tell whether it's too late, but you know, it was always clear we're going to pay for this. Either we're going to pay for it now, or we're going to pay for it at a 10 times markup down the road, because it is always easier to prepare and prevent these types of catastrophes than it is to clean up for them afterwards.
Right, and we are paying for it right now.
Yeah.
Well, Mike Augustyniak, thank you so much. We certainly appreciate your insights, as always.
Sure.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please email me with comments and suggestions at esme@wcco.com. The show streams every Wednesday and Thursday at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. On Friday, the show posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.